Sometimes life's biggest storms come from the most unexpected directions. For Raj, this storm began brewing right when everything in his life seemed perfect. He still remembered the day he first met Priya at their mutual friend's wedding. She was the one laughing the loudest at all his terrible jokes, and somehow that made her the most beautiful person in the room. Their love story wasn't anything extraordinary, but it was theirs. Late-night phone calls that lasted until sunrise, surprise lunch visits at each other's workplaces, and weekend adventures exploring hidden cafes in the city. When they got married 2 years later, even the weather seemed to celebrate with them. It was a perfect sunny day after a week of predicted rain. Life had a bigger surprise waiting for them just a year into their marriage. During a routine checkup, their doctor's face lit up with an unexpected smile. "I'm seeing 2 heartbeats here," she said, and just like that, their world transformed. Twins. The news spread through their families like wildfire, bringing twice the joy, twice the celebrations, and of course, twice the advice from every relative who had ever held a baby. The pregnancy months flew by in a blur of baby shopping, nursery decoration, and Raj frantically reading every parenting book he could find. He even started a baby journal, documenting every little kick and craving, though he probably never admitted it to his friends. Priya would often find him talking to her belly late at night, telling the twins stories about how he met their mother. When the twins finally arrived, a boy and a girl, they were tiny but perfect. The boy was born 2 minutes earlier and already seemed to have his father's curious eyes, while the little girl had her mother's dimpled smile. Those first few months were a beautiful chaos of midnight feedings, learning to change 2 diapers at lightning speed, and figuring out how to function on minimal sleep. But they were happy, really happy. Raj would come home from work to find Priya singing lullabies to the twins, sometimes in Hindi, sometimes in English, mixing up the words when she was too tired to remember them properly. He'd join in with his terrible singing voice, and somehow the babies seemed to love that the most. Their tiny apartment was always filled with the sounds of baby giggles, lullabies, and occasional cries that they were slowly learning to decode. Their friends started calling them the Dream Team, watching how they tagged each other in and out during baby duties, how they could communicate entire conversations just through looks, and how they still managed to make each other laugh even after the most exhausting days. Even their pediatrician commented on how in sync they were as parents. Then came the news that would change everything. Priya's mother was moving to their city. She had just finalized her divorce and wanted to be closer to her only daughter and her grandchildren. Initially, it seemed like a blessing, an extra pair of hands to help with the twins, someone to share their joyful moments with. Priya was especially excited to have her mother nearby, remembering how much she had missed her during the early days of motherhood. Nobody could have guessed that this seemingly positive change would be the beginning of their troubles. Looking back, Raj should have noticed the small signs. The way his mother-in-law's smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at him, how she would subtly remind Priya of her other options before marriage, or how she always seemed to bring up Priya's ex-classmates who had done so well for themselves. But in those days, Raj was too busy being happy, too occupied with memorizing each new expression on his babies' faces, too content in the life he and Priya had built together. Their love story might not have been extraordinary, but their family was. At least, that's what he thought before his mother-in-law decided to rewrite their story her way. The twins were just starting to smile responsively, reaching out their tiny hands to touch their parents' faces, and making those adorable cooing sounds that melted everyone's hearts. Each day brought new little milestones, the first time they rolled over, the way they would babble to each other in their own secret twin language, their synchronized giggles when Raj made funny faces at them during diaper changes. Life felt complete. Their small apartment might not have been a mansion, and they might have been living on a tight budget, but they had love, loads of it. Every weekend was a new adventure, even if it just meant a picnic in the living room with the twins laying on their playmat, reaching for the colorful toys hanging above them. They were creating their own perfect world, one baby smile at a time. Little did they know that their perfect world was about to be tested in ways they never imagined. It started with little things, so small that Raj couldn't quite put his finger on what was wrong. His mother-in-law, Mrs. Kumar, began dropping by unannounced, always during the times when he was at work. At first, it seemed innocent enough. A grandmother wanting to spend time with her grandchildren. But slowly, the atmosphere in their home began to change. Priya started acting different after these visits. The change was subtle, like morning dew that you don't notice until it's already dampened your clothes. She stopped sharing funny stories about her day, no longer left sweet notes in his lunchbox, and that evening ritual of watching the twins sleep together while sharing their dreams became less and less frequent. "They're just going through a fussy phase," Priya would say when Ray tried to spend time with the twins, but he noticed how the babies were perfectly calm when his mother-in-law held them. Had he somehow forgotten how to comfort his own children? The thought kept him awake at night, staring at the ceiling while the rest of his family slept. Mrs. Kumar had a way of making casual remarks that stuck like thorns. "Oh, you're working late again?" she would say when he came home at his regular time. "I suppose some men prioritize their careers over family." She'd say it with a smile, but her eyes remained cold. The worst part was how these comments always came when Priya was within earshot, but just far enough away to miss the context. The weekend outings that once filled their home with laughter became rare. Mrs. Kumar always had a reason why it wasn't a good idea. "The park is too dusty for the babies," or "the weather report says it might rain next week." Somehow, her predictions of rain only seemed to apply to the plans Raj made. Their cozy apartment, once their haven, started feeling more like a stage where he was constantly performing. He found himself second-guessing every decision, from how he held the babies to what groceries he bought. "Oh, you got that brand of diapers?" Mrs. Kumar would say, clicking her tongue. "Well, I suppose they're affordable." The twins were now 7 months old, and despite everything, they still lit up when they saw their father. The boy would bounce excitedly in his baby seat, while his sister would give that gummy smile that made Raj's heart melt. These moments became his anchor, reminding him that he wasn't imagining things, that he was still a good father. But then came the photos. Mrs. Kumar started showing Priya pictures from her college days, especially ones featuring Rohit, her ex-boyfriend. "He just got promoted to CEO of his company," she would casually mention. "Such a shame you two lost touch. He always asks about you when I run into his mother at the temple." Raj noticed how Priya's phone started buzzing more frequently with messages. He wasn't the type to snoop, but he caught glimpses of long conversations between his wife and her mother. Sometimes, Priya would quickly switch screens when he walked into the room, leaving him with an uneasy feeling in his stomach. The breaking point came during a family dinner. Mrs. Kumar had invited herself over, as usual, and brought her special biryani, the one she knew was Priya's favorite. Between bites, she started talking about her friend's daughter who had made the brave choice to start fresh after 5 years of marriage. "Sometimes we make decisions when we're young," she said, looking directly at Priya, "but it's never too late to fix them." That night, for the first time since they got married, Priya slept in the twins' room, claiming she needed to be closer to them during their teething phase. Raj lay alone in their bed, listening to the sound of his mother-in-law's voice drifting through the walls as she spoke softly to Priya, words too quiet for him to make out. He tried talking to his friends about it, but how do you explain that your perfectly fine marriage is being unraveled by whispers and subtle gestures? They told him he was being paranoid, that it was normal for new mothers to be closer to their own mothers during the baby phase. But they hadn't seen the way Priya's eyes had stopped meeting his, how she flinched slightly when their hands accidentally touched while passing the baby bottle. The twins were the only ones who hadn't changed. They still reached for him with their chubby hands, still laughed at his silly faces, still fell asleep instantly when he hummed their favorite lullaby. In those precious moments when it was just him and his babies, everything felt right in the world. But these moments were becoming increasingly rare as Mrs. Kumar found more reasons to be present during his time with them. As Raj watched his wife become more distant with each passing day, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching his family slip through his fingers like sand. The weight of unspoken words hung heavy in their home, and the silence between him and Priya grew louder than their twins' cries. Something had to give. He just didn't know what, or when, or how badly it would hurt when it did. Mrs. Kumar had turned manipulation into an art form, painting her lies with such delicate strokes that even Priya couldn't see the full picture forming around her. It was like watching a spider weave its web, careful, patient, and devastatingly effective. The morning started like any other, with Raj leaving for work after kissing the twins goodbye. But this particular morning, Mrs. Kumar had arrived earlier than usual, armed with a folder full of what she called evidence. She waited until Raj's car had disappeared around the corner before starting her carefully planned performance. "Darling," she said to Priya, who was feeding the twins their morning cereal, "I've been keeping something from you because I didn't want to hurt you." Her voice trembled just enough to sound concerned rather than calculating. "But as a mother, I can't stay quiet anymore." The folder contained carefully selected photos. Raj's car parked outside his office building late at night when he was working overtime to save for the twins' future, receipts from restaurants he'd never been to, doctored by Mrs. Kumar's friend who owned a small eatery, and even a fake bank statement suggesting he was secretly sending money elsewhere. "I hired someone to look into things," Mrs. Kumar confessed, as if it pained her greatly. "I couldn't bear to see you working so hard with the twins while he—" She left the sentence hanging, letting Priya's imagination fill in the blanks. The twins babbled happily in their high chairs, unaware of the poison being dripped into their mother's ears. Meanwhile, at work, Raj was throwing himself into a new project, hoping his extra efforts would help secure the promotion he'd been eyeing. Every extra rupee would help give his children a better future. During his lunch break, he scrolled through photos of the twins on his phone, his heart aching at how fast they were growing. Back at home, Mrs. Kumar was orchestrating the next phase of her plan. She'd invited Rohit's mother over for tea, timing it perfectly so Priya would be there with the twins. "Oh, look how good you are with children," Rohit's mother cooed, watching Priya with the babies. "You know, Rohit just bought a beautiful 4-bedroom house. He always said he wanted a big family." The seeds of doubt had been planted weeks ago, but now Mrs. Kumar was fertilizing them with tears and tragic stories. She told Priya about her own marriage, how she wished she'd left sooner, how she'd stayed for the children, but now realized she should have given them a chance at a better life, conveniently forgetting to mention that her ex-husband's only crime had been his modest income. Priya started finding herself alone with Rohit's mother more often, always by seemingly innocent coincidence. "He never married, you know," the woman would say while helping with the twins. "He said his heart belonged to someone he lost." She would glance meaningfully at Priya, letting the words sink in. The twins had started crawling now, their little hands patting against the floor as they explored their world. The boy would always crawl to the door around the time Raj usually came home, as if he could sense his father's approach. These moments broke Mrs. Kumar's heart, not out of sympathy, but frustration. The baby's obvious attachment to their father was an obstacle in her plan. She began timing the twins' naps to coincide with Raj's time at home, claiming they needed a strict schedule. "The pediatrician says it's crucial for their development," she insisted, despite no doctor having said any such thing. Gradually, Raj's time with his children shrank to brief moments between their artificially enforced sleep schedule. One evening, when Raj tried to play with the twins during their designated nap time, Mrs. Kumar swooped in with practiced concern. "Oh dear, you'll disrupt their routine. No wonder they've been so fussy lately. Priya, darling, perhaps you should take them to my house for a few days. They need stability." The manipulation took a toll on everyone. The once warm home felt like a battlefield of whispers and pointed silences. Raj noticed Priya had started dressing differently, wearing clothes her mother brought her, clothes that reminded him of her college photos with Rohit. The twins sensed the tension too, becoming clingier and more anxious. Mrs. Kumar saved her masterstroke for a quiet Sunday afternoon. She arranged for Rohit to accidentally run into them at the temple where Priya had taken the twins for their blessing ceremony, a ceremony Raj had been told was scheduled for the following week. She watched from a distance as Rohit played with the twins, her smile growing as she saw Priya laugh for the first time in weeks. That evening, she showed Priya more photos, this time of Rohit with the twins at the temple. "Look how natural he is with them," she said softly. "Some men are just born to be fathers." The unspoken comparison hung in the air like smoke, choking the last bits of trust in Priya's marriage. The twins were in their crib, holding hands as they slept, a habit they'd had since birth. Raj stood in the doorway, watching them breathe, unaware that his time with them was running out. In their peaceful sleep, they still looked like the perfect family he dreamed of. But dreams, as Mrs. Kumar was determined to prove, were made to be broken. That Tuesday started like any other day. Raj kissed his sleeping twins goodbye, left a cup of Priya's favorite morning tea on the kitchen counter, and headed to work. He had no way of knowing that this ordinary morning would become the day that changed everything. The first sign that something was wrong came around lunchtime. He tried calling home to hear the twins babbling, their daily ritual that always brightened his workday. No answer. He told himself Priya must be busy with the baby's nap time and tried to focus on his project presentation. By 3 p.m., an uneasy feeling had settled in his stomach. He tried calling again. Still no answer. He texted Priya, "Miss my little monster's giggles. How are they doing?" The message showed as delivered but remained unread. He called his mother-in-law's number, but it went straight to voicemail. At 4:30 p.m., he couldn't take it anymore. He told his boss he had a family emergency and rushed home. The drive that usually took 20 minutes felt like hours. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white, while his mind raced through all the possibilities. Maybe they were at the doctor's. But Priya always told him about doctor visits. The apartment was silent when he opened the door. No baby sounds. No TV playing the cartoon channel that the twins loved. No smell of evening tea brewing. Just silence, the kind that screams louder than any noise. He walked through each room, his heart pounding harder with every empty space he found. The twins' room looked different. Their favorite stuffed animals were missing. The drawer where Priya kept their special occasion clothes was empty. On the changing table, he found a note in Priya's handwriting. "We need some space. Please don't try to find us." His legs gave out, and he sat on the nursery floor, surrounded by the ghosts of his children's laughter. The room still smelled like baby powder and the lavender lotion they used after bath time. One of the twins' socks had fallen behind the crib, a tiny blue thing that broke his heart all over again when he found it. He tried calling Priya's best friend, Meena. She sounded uncomfortable on the phone, clearly torn between loyalties. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Priya made me promise not to tell you anything." But she paused, and he could hear her internal struggle. "They're safe, that's all I can say." The next few hours passed in a blur. He called every hospital, thinking maybe there had been an emergency. He drove to Mrs. Kumar's house, but it was dark and empty. He even went to the temple where they used to take the twins for blessings, hoping to find some clue. Around midnight, he found himself sitting in the twins' room again, holding their matching blankets. The boys had little elephants on it, while his sisters had dancing peacocks. They never slept well without these blankets. Were they crying for them now? Were they confused, wondering why they weren't in their familiar crib? His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of the twins sleeping peacefully, sent by Meena from a new number. His heart both soared and shattered at the sight of their peaceful faces. Below the photo was a message. "They're okay. Give her the space she's asking for." But how could he just give space when his entire world had been taken away? The twins were only 8 months old, too young to understand why their father had suddenly disappeared from their lives. Would they forget him? Would their first words be called out to someone else? Would another man teach his son to walk, comfort his daughter when she cried? He spent that night going through every photo and video on his phone. The twins' first smile, their first laugh, the time they discovered their feet, their first solid food adventure that ended with more food on their faces than in their mouths. Each memory felt like a stab to his heart. Morning came, and with it, a tiny spark of determination. He remembered how his daughter would scrunch up her nose just like him when she laughed, how his son had the same habit of rubbing his eyes when tired. These weren't just memories, they were proof of an unbreakable bond. He called in sick to work and started writing, emails, messages, letters. He wrote about every moment he remembered, every dream he had for their future, every promise he wanted to keep. He wrote about bedtime stories left unfinished, first steps he was waiting to witness, birthday cakes he wanted to bake. His last message was to Priya. "I don't know what stories you've been told, what doubts have been planted in your mind. But I do know this, those twins are half you and half me. They're the best of both of us, and just like you can't erase their dimples that match yours, you can't erase the love that created them. Whatever space you need, I'll respect it. But I'm not giving up on our family. Not today, not ever." He sent the message, knowing it might go unread like all the others. Then he did the hardest thing he'd ever done. He waited. Sometimes the bravest thing a father can do is stay strong, stay present, and keep his heart open, even when it's breaking. 2 weeks had passed since Pryor left with the twins. 2 weeks of silence that felt like 2 years. Rage threw himself into his work, staying late at the office because going home to an empty apartment hurt too much. His desk had become a shrine to his family. Photos of the twins surrounded his computer screen, their silly faces giving him strength to keep going. His startup company had been working on an app to help parents track their babies' development milestones. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, building something to help parents when he couldn't even see his own children. But maybe that's why he worked harder on it than ever before. Each feature he added felt like a message to his twins, proof that he was thinking about them every single moment. That's when the local business channel reached out. They were doing a series on innovative startups in the city, and his company's app had caught their attention. The producer was especially interested in the personal story behind it, how being a father had inspired the idea. Rage almost declined the interview, not sure if he could talk about his children without breaking down. But something made him say yes. Maybe it was hope, or maybe just exhaustion from carrying his pain in silence. The morning of the interview, he wore the tie that had tiny giraffes on it, a Father's Day gift from Pryor that the twins always tried to grab when he held them. The interview started with standard questions about the app's features and business model. Then the reporter, a kind-faced woman named Anjali, asked about his inspiration. "I see you have photos of 2 beautiful babies on your desk," she said. "Are they yours?" In that moment, something in Raj cracked open. "Yes," he said, his voice soft but clear. "My twins. They're 8 months old now." He picked up a frame showing the twins during their first solid food adventure, sweet potato smeared across their chubby cheeks. "Everything I build into this app comes from wanting to capture every precious moment with them." The camera zoomed in on his desk, showing the timeline of photos, the twins' first smile, their first time rolling over, their matching outfits during festival celebrations. Rage explained each feature of the app while referencing real moments with his children, how the milestone tracker was inspired by his daughter reaching for her brother's hand during tummy time, how the sleep pattern analyzer came from nights spent learning their different crying sounds. What Rage didn't know was that at that exact moment in Mrs. Kuma's house, Pryor was absent-mindedly flipping through TV channels while the twins napped. She paused on the business channel, struck by a familiar voice. And there was Raj, their baby's photos surrounding him, speaking with such love about every little moment she thought he had been too busy to notice. "The best feature," Raj was saying on screen, "is the memory journal. Because sometimes the smallest moments are the biggest treasures, like how my son always rubs his eyes exactly like me when he's sleepy, or how my daughter scrunches her nose like her mother when she laughs." His voice carried a weight of love that no amount of lies could deny. The camera caught a tear rolling down his cheek as he demonstrated the app's photo timeline feature. "Sorry," he said, wiping it away quickly. "It's just, every parent knows that feeling when you look at your child and your heart feels too big for your chest. This app is for capturing those moments because they're gone too fast." In Mrs. Kuma's living room, Praya sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. On the floor beside her, the twins were playing with their blocks. Her daughter was rubbing her eyes sleepily, exactly like Rage did. Her son looked up at the TV and pointed, recognizing his father's voice even through the speakers. The interview continued, with Raj's colleagues sharing stories about his dedication. "He's always the first one here and the last to leave," one said. "But no matter how busy things get, he never misses his daily video call time. We'd actually schedule our meetings around it because we know that's his sacred time with his kids." Another colleague mentioned how Rage had built a small nursery corner in the office. He'd hoped his wife would bring the twins to visit during lunch breaks, she explained. He even baby-proofed all the sharp corners. The camera panned to the empty nursery corner, the tiny chairs and soft play mat waiting for visitors who never came. As the segment ended, Anjali asked one final question. "What's your biggest dream for this app?" Raj looked directly into the camera, and somehow, Praya felt like he was looking right at her. "To help parents treasure every moment with their children," he said. "Because at the end of the day, nothing else matters." Nothing. The twins chose that moment to babble excitedly, reaching toward the TV screen where their father's face had been. The sound broke something in Praya's heart. the wall of doubts and lies that had been carefully built around her. She looked at her babies, really looked at them, and saw rage in every smile, every gesture, every tiny movement. In his office, Rage was packing up after the interview, carefully straightening the photos on his desk. He had no idea that his words had traveled through the airwaves and found their way home, or that truth had finally begun to crack the foundation of his mother-in-law's carefully constructed deception. The living room fell silent except for the soft murmur of the television. Maria sat frozen, her fingers clutching the remote control so tightly her knuckles turned white. The documentary about her husband played across the screen, each moment peeling back the layers of lies she'd been fed for months. Her mother had always been protective, or so Maria thought. But now, watching Jake with their twin boys, something inside her began to shift. The man on screen was nothing like the person her mother had described. This wasn't some struggling, unreliable husband. This was a dedicated father, a passionate teacher who poured his heart into everything he did. Small moments caught her attention. Jake wiping away a student's tears after a difficult day. Him cooking dinner while helping the boys with their homework, his patience seemingly endless. The way he looked at their children, it was a look of pure, unconditional love that couldn't be faked. "Mom," Maria whispered, her voice trembling, "is this true? Have you been lying to me all this time?" Elena shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The carefully constructed narrative she'd been building for months was crumbling right before her eyes. Each scene from the documentary was like a hammer blow, destroying the false story she'd created about Jake. Maria remembered the conversations they'd had. Her mother's supple comments. The way she'd constantly compared Jake to other men, always finding him lacking. The expensive gifts, the chance meetings with successful businessmen, it all seemed so calculated now. "I was just trying to protect you," Elena mumbled, but her words rang hollow. The documentary continued, showing Jake volunteering at a local community center, helping kids who had nobody else to support them. It wasn't just about being a good teacher or a good father. He was genuinely changing lives. Tears started rolling down Maria's cheeks. Not tears of sadness, but of realization. She thought about the past few months, how distant she'd become, how she'd slowly been pushing Jake away. All because of her mother's manipulative whispers. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jake. "Hope you're doing okay. The boys miss you. We all miss you." The simple message broke something inside her. No anger. No drama. Just pure, honest love. "I need to go home," Maria said suddenly, standing up. Her mother reached out to stop her, but Maria pulled away. "No more. I'm done listening to your stories." The drive home felt different. The city looked the same, but everything felt new. Maria's mind raced with memories, real memories of Jake, not the twisted version her mother had painted. The late-night talks, the way he supported her dreams, how he'd always been her biggest cheerleader. When she arrived home, Jake was in the backyard with the twins. They were building something, looked like a birdhouse, judging by the scattered wood and Jake's patient instructions. The boys were laughing, completely absorbed in the project. Jake looked up, surprise flickering across his face. No anger. No accusations. Just a look of pure, hopeful love. "Hey," he said simply. And just like that, Maria knew they would be okay. The truth had a way of cutting through lies, no matter how carefully they were constructed. Her mother's plan had backfired spectacularly, and their family, their real, messy, beautiful family, was going to be just fine. Life doesn't come with a reset button, but sometimes it offers a second chance. For Jake and Maria, the months following the documentary were like walking through a minefield of emotions, trust, and forgiveness. Their first family counseling session was awkward. The therapist's office felt too bright, too clinical. Jake sat holding Maria's hand, their twin boys playing quietly with some toys in the corner. Their little faces, so innocent and unaware of the storm that had almost torn their family apart, brought a sense of hope. "I'm sorry," Maria whispered, her voice breaking. "I let my mother's words poison everything." Jake didn't respond with anger or blame. Instead, he squeezed her hand. "We're here now," he said simply. Those 4 words carried the weight of everything they'd been through. The healing wasn't instant. Some days were harder than others. Maria discovered the depth of her mother's manipulation, how carefully Elena had constructed a narrative designed to break them apart. Old text messages, carefully saved emails, a paper trail of calculated destruction. Her mother tried to reach out, at first with angry phone calls, then with desperate pleas. But Maria had found her strength. She realized that love isn't about control, it's about support, trust, and letting people be themselves. Jake continued his teaching, but something had changed. The documentary had brought unexpected attention. Parents, students, and community members reached out, sharing how his story had touched them. He became a symbol of quiet, persistent love, the kind that doesn't make headlines but changes lives one small moment at a time. The twins, Ethan and Liam, remained their anchor. Kids have an incredible ability to heal. They didn't care about the drama, the arguments, or the past. They just wanted their parents together, playing, laughing, loving. One Saturday morning changed everything. Jake was making pancakes, a weekend tradition he never stopped, even during their separation. Flour dusted his cheek, and the boys were giggling, trying to help by making more mess than progress. Maria watched from the doorway, a cup of coffee warming her hands. She realized love wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up. Every single day. Their journey wasn't just about surviving a family crisis. It was about understanding. About learning that family can hurt you, but family can also be the greatest source of healing. Elena slowly came to understand the consequences of her actions. The documentary had not just exposed her manipulation, it had shown the community the kind of love she had tried to destroy. Gradually, she began to see her daughter and son-in-law differently. Their first family dinner after reconciliation was awkward but hopeful. Conversations were careful, measured. But there was an underlying current of something beautiful, the possibility of understanding. Jake's students became part of their healing journey. Many of them had seen the documentary, and their respect for him grew. They saw a teacher who practiced what he preached: love, patience, understanding. Maria started a support group for young couples dealing with family interference. Her story became a beacon of hope for others struggling with similar challenges. She spoke about recognizing manipulation, about the importance of communication, about choosing love over fear. The boys grew, blissfully unaware of how close they had come to losing their family unit. They knew only love, a love that had been tested, had bent, but never broke. Years later, when people asked about their story, Jake and Maria would exchange a look that said more than words ever could. A look of survival, of love, of a family that had faced its darkest moment and emerged stronger. Their story wasn't just about overcoming a mother-in-law's manipulation. It was about the power of choosing each other. Every single day. The scars remained, soft, barely visible, but they were a reminder of what they'd survived, of the love that had saved them.